Hello and welcome to another episode of Chuchu is a Ranker, and on this episode we are going to be discussing the discography of Radiohead. Hailing from Oxford, England, the band formed in 1985 and consists of vocalist, guitarist and keyboardist Thom Yorke, guitarist and multi-instrumentalist Jonny Greenwood, his brother Colin Greenwood on bass, Philip Selway on drums and Ed O'Brien on guitars and backing vocals. The band were initially tagged as part of the Britpop movement during the mid-90s, but the creative shift of the band's third LP, OK Computer, and its follow-up, Kid A, firmly set the band apart from the movement, with the influence of those records being so impactful that they actually reshaped the course of rock music. In turn, Radiohead became massively successful both critically and commercially, and still maintain their status as legendary icons of alternative rock to this day. And as for my own fandom, well, it's complicated. Like, I grew up listening to Radiohead and I think their best work is phenomenal, but I'm also not one of those people that worship at the band's altar. As you're about to find out, Radiohead are actually quite a mixed bag for me, and I do feel that they have been rather overrated at times. So if you're one of the band's true devotees and believe that they've done no wrong, fair warning, best buckle up as the early going on this list might be a bit turbulent for you. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are the studio albums of Radiohead ranked from worst to best. So, coming in last place, dead last, we have the band's 1993 debut album, Pablo Honey. And I won't beat around the bush on this one, I've never liked this record. I didn't like it when I was a teenager back in the Britpop days, and I still don't like it now. And speaking of Britpop, that's exactly what this is. It's a very typical Britpop album with lots of grungy guitars and bouncing pop rock. Except it's not a very good one, and is hopelessly outgunned when put up against typical Britpop competition such as Suede or Blur. The main problem here is Thom Yorke. His vocal style just doesn't suit this type of bouncy guitar pop that the band are trying to craft on this. The music and vocals really clash here and rarely come together harmoniously. It's telling that the poppier the material gets, the worse it is. The nadir of the LP is the track How Do You, which features a truly awful vocal performance from Thom that tries for that playful, flamboyant, fashionable geezer thing that was all the rage back in the Britpop era. It's a spectacularly embarrassing facepalm moment. Add into that a large swathe of rote, uninteresting or half-baked tunes such as Ripcord, Vegetable, Thinking About You or I Can't, and you have an album that truly flounders. Christ, even the single Anyone Can Play Guitar is not nearly as catchy as it thinks it is. But there are a small clutch of tracks that do point the way forward. The howling feedback, snarling metallic guitar fuzz and oddly timed rhythm of the opening U kicks the record off in the right way. The famously dismissed by the band hit Creep is amazing. Its outsider lyrics, thunderous guitar squall, and iconic catchiness standing out as the best track on the album by far. Lurgy's steady jangle balladry is quietly beautiful and gives you a brief glimpse of what the band are capable of. While closer, Blowout has a nice sense of creeping darkness and some really kick-ass guitar work that ratchets up the song's intensity. But still, 4 gleaming nuggets of goodness in a swampy sea of bland mediocrity is not enough to right the ship. Thankfully the band would get much better and properly find their feet immediately after Pablo Honey, but here on this debut, Radiohead just sound lost. 2 stars. From first to last, because next up we have A Moonshaped Pool from 2016, which was the band's 9th LP and most recent to date. And this album is just vibes, and that's all. Jonny Greenwood stretches his string arranging chops here, and the record is categorised by its elegant cellos and violins, haunting backing vocals and dreamlike distant soundscapes. All of the tracks service the overall atmosphere, which is super relaxed, nicely melancholic and extremely cohesive. The songs themselves rarely follow a defined structure. There's a notable lack of choruses or indeed verses. These tunes just organically ebb and flow at the whim of the sonic tide. To that end, there's not really a lot that stands out on an individual level. This definitely isn't an album that you'd want to pull tracks from for a playlist. This is a proper sit down and listen from start to finish and let the atmosphere absorb you kind of record. And for what it is, I think it's decent. It ably does what it obviously sets out to do, but it is undoubtedly a specific album for a specific time or mood. Unfortunately for me personally, this just isn't a very engaging sound. As I said, it's super relaxed and works well as background music or in a moment where you want to be totally chill or zen or whatever, but there's nothing on this album that excites me or catches my attention or indeed really pulls me back to listen to it again. But that's not to say that I dislike any of the tracks on this. Indeed, they're all perfectly palatable. As for highlights, well, as I said, it's not really that kind of album, but I guess the percussive string stabs on the opening Burn the Witch are pretty cool, as are the huge Vangelis style synths on Full Stop, and I suppose Identikit does at least have a catchy refrain and is easily the most direct pop orientated cut on the record. So yeah, a Moon-Shaped Pool is a decent mood piece, if you happen to be in that particular zone. If you're not in that mood, however, this album can be quite tedious and overlong. And sadly on this particular discography run, I just wasn't really gelling with the vibes of this record so much. Still, it's not bad. 3 stars. Next up we have Hail to the Thief from 2003, which was the band's 6th LP. And this album kind of wraps up the trilogy of mid-period Radiohead records. You had the groundbreaking electronica of Kid A, the slightly messy, slightly throwaway follow-up Amnesiac, which was basically just leftover Kid A stuff, and here you have Hail to the Thief, which really feels like the leftover bits and bobs from Amnesiac. Of course, I'm not being entirely fair there, as while Amnesiac was recorded in the same sessions as Kid A, Hail to the Thief is its own proper standalone studio album. Not only that, but one which properly brought back guitars, rock instrumentation, and even some actual pop structure to the table. But as pleasing as Radiohead's promised return to rock sounds, it's a really tempered affair with many faults. Some real throwaway tunes, a lack of focus and cohesion, experimental or ambient pieces that don't really add all that much to the record. It's a really mixed bag that, when all is said and done and accounted for, is not all that different from Amnesiac. I mean, you could swap around the tracks between both albums and you still end up with more or less the same kind of thing. For me, this is the first Radiohead album that truly feels like diminishing returns. The ambient and synth stuff sounds overly familiar here, and the rock material, whilst decent and appreciated, doesn't have the same quality or freshness as records like The Bends or OK Computer. This album really feels like a compilation of Radiohead B-sides with a couple of great singles thrown in there too. Plus at 56 minutes, the LP is too long and could well be shot of the weaker cuts that drag it down. And speaking of weaker cuts, the cuts that probably should have been cut include the anodyne electronica of Backdrifts, the boring piano dirge We Suck Young Blood, the useless and poorly sequenced minimal guitar piece I Will, which completely halts the record's momentum after they're there, and the hookless bluster of A Punch Up at a Wedding. Talk about being up to your nuts in cuts. On the flip side, there are also some pretty good tunes waiting in the wings. Opener 2 + 2 = 5 has a fun, punky whiplash to it. Where I End and You Begin is all trip-hop beats and huge sounding synths. There is a catchy OK Computer style art rocker with an excellent and satisfying build-up and payoff. The booming drums and wiry guitar on the track are pretty damn cool. Scatterbrain has a beautiful misery emanating from its arpeggiated guitar licks. Mixomatosis uses a giant bass synth to power its dark groove, while Closer, A Wolf at the Door has a fun chaotic vocal that's nicely at odds with the track's sorrowful backing. So yeah, Hail to the Thief is frankly all over the place in terms of quality. Its best moments are great, but its weakest moments rank among the band's very worst. It's the very definition of a mixed bag for me. 3 stars. Next up, we have The King of Limbs from 2011, which is the band's 8th LP, and this is very much in the same vein as A Moon-Shaped Pool. It's an ambient album that's all about chasing down a specific soundscape. This time though, the band are focused on using loops to power the tracks, specifically when it comes to the percussion. To that end, the record has a kind of skittering rhythmic thrust to it that I find a good bit more engaging than A Moon-Shaped Pool's elegant strings and glacial pacing. That said, this album definitely isn't perfect. Much the same as A Moon-Shaped Pool, the songs lack a defined structure. There are no verses or choruses, with the tracks weaving formlessly around the mechanical beats and pulsing synths. It's a nice overall sound, but the individual songs themselves are not particularly memorable. This is compounded by a weak ending, as the lethargic pace of Give Up the Ghost puts a boring dent in the album, and closer, Separator doesn't do enough to steer things back on course. Which is a shame, as there are many good things about this LP. Firstly, it's only 37 minutes long. While some might complain about the short length, I personally like the brevity and think it adds to the record's appeal. I mean, do I really want an entire hour of what the King of Limbs is doing? Probably not. Most of the other tracks, though, whilst not really standing out, are pretty good and contribute well to the album's overall atmosphere. Although highlighting individual tracks is a very moot point here, my favourites would include the opening Bloom, which is great with its rattling drum work and, well, yes, blooming swells. Morning Mr. Magpie has a cool jittering composition and a stronger melody than most of the other tracks. Lotus Flower has a really nice laid back groove to it, while Codex is beautiful with its distant piano balladry and waves of nervous effects. So yeah, this is often dismissed as the band's weakest work, but I think the driving percussion, manageable length and in the bowels of the machine type of sonic atmosphere imbue this record with something worthwhile. Whilst The Moon-Shaped Pool was a bit too formless and sluggish, and Hail to the Thief was too disparate and inconsistent, The King of Limbs pushes through its imperfections for a mild win, 3.5 stars. Coming up next, we have Amnesiac from 2001, which was the band's 5th LP, and at the time it must have been quite a disappointing one. When the highly experimental and electronica-based Kid A was released, it came with the announcement that the band's next record had also been recorded during the same sessions, and would see the band returning to a more guitar-based sound. Except that was just a total crock of shit, and Amnesiac actually turned out just to be Kid A Light. Indeed, this album does feel very much like a collection of leftovers. It doesn't have Kid A's incredible cohesion or focused atmosphere. It feels more like a quick-fire record of somewhat scattershot experimental pieces, standing alongside some pretty good high spots. Some of the scattershot offenders would be the undercooked blippy-bloopy electronics of the opener, packed like sardines in a crushed box, the listless instrumentals of Hunting Bears and Like Spinning Plates, and the tuneless fidgety dirge of Polk/Revolving Door. I mean, seriously, has anyone on Earth ever sat down and thought, oh man, like I really need to listen to Polk/Revolving Door right now? But the thing is, while these tracks don't play well individually, they do somehow get pulled into the texture of the record and are actually beneficial to the overall atmosphere, if you have the patience for them. Because while Amnesiac can't compete with its older brothers, Icy Darkness, there is a certain low, burbling, melancholic vibe that belongs to this record and this record alone. Genuine highlights, however, include the utterly beguiling Pyramid song with its somber pianos and strange minor key melodies. You and Whose Army drags you in with Tom York's defiantly aggressive yet drawling lyrics. I Might Be Wrong has a nice percussion section propelling its mysterious icy synth dirge. Knives Out is beautiful with its melancholic guitar sound that harks back to the band's rockest peak, while Life in a Glass House closes the LP with an unexpected turn into jazz territory. Its layered horns sounding akin to a New Orleans funeral march, it's pretty darn cool. So yeah, although it's not what the band had promised at the time, and isn't as good or as revelatory as the records that came directly before it, Amnesiac is still an atmospheric and very worthwhile addition to the band's discography. 4 stars. Next up we have The Bends from 1995, which was the band's sophomore LP. And 1995, lest we forget, was the height of Britpop, and The Bends is the most intrinsically linked Radiohead album to that movement. Indeed, the Britpop landscape of 1995 could scarcely be imagined without the likes of High and Dry, Street Spirit or Fake Plastic Trees populating the airwaves. As good as The Bends was, its thumping rock was so much under the umbrella of Britpop that it would have been hard to believe that the band were on the cusp of changing the entire direction of modern rock. At the time, The Bends was just another Britpop record, albeit a very good one. To that point, the band don't quite make it out untarnished by the Britpop brush. The scant handful of weak spots on this record are of the ubiquitous Britpop style. Tracks like Bones and Black Star have that blustery throwaway nature that plagued a great deal of the movement's acts. Even though I'll admit that Black Star is pretty rad and badassly catchy, I'm actually not sure why I'm ragging on that song, while the weakest track here, the undercooked ballad Sulk, really should have been cut and used as a B-side or something. That track really does feel like typical Britpop filler. But those weaker moments aside, and The Bends is an absolutely rollicking rock record that consistently hits incredible heights. High and Dry balances its beautifully dour misery with a giant skyscraping chorus that makes you want to sing into the rafters. My Iron Lung has a cool wiry brutality once it fires up, which is nicely at odds with the rhythmic minimalism of what came before. Nice Dream and Bulletproof I Wish I Was use a Smithian dourness and beautiful arpeggiated guitar lines to seal in their alluringly cathartic flavours. Street Spirit Fade Out is a great closer with a lovely pick guitar riff and a sense of withering sadness and lurking danger. While Fake Plastic Trees is one of the most tender, brilliant and heart-wrenching ballads ever put to tape. Tom York is super impressive on the track, veering between powerful to fragile at the drop of a hat. I mean, if you've never nursed a beer while singing the "If I Could Be Who You Wanted" refrain while being really fucking sad, you're just not doing life quite right. Mwah! Chef's kiss, that song is a masterpiece. So yeah, I'm just grazing the surface on the amount of good stuff on offer. Just has a fun chorus and enough energy to make you accidentally put a hole in your granddad's drywall. Title track The Bends has a savage cunny for a guitar snarl. Stick your fingers in that shit and they'll get bitten off. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm going to rein myself in there. Ultimately, The Bends is a truly excellent rock album and a very valuable step forward from Pablo Honey. For me, the odd Britpop wobble negates any further progress for The Bends on this list, but it doesn't negate just how much joy this album has given me over the years. Thank you very much, Radiohead. 5 stars. Kid A from the year of 2000 is up next, which was the band's 4th LP. And here Radiohead faced an impossible task: how to follow up one of the most acclaimed and genre-defining albums of its generation. OK Computer had been so instantaneously influential that it left some pretty massive boots to fill. And the band did struggle with this, only finding their feet again when they turned away from rock and looked towards the genre of electronica. On the surface, that was a risky move, as the late 90s had been filled with half-hearted dalliances from the Britpop crowd. Indulging in blips and bloops and trip-hop beats was all the rage back then, and not many of the artists trying to incorporate those elements were being successful at it. But of course, Radiohead is a different beast than most 90s acts, and against all odds the band managed to whack out another gigantic home run and provide yet another album that totally shifted the goalposts within the genre that they were aiming for. Upon release, Kid A immediately eclipsed any previous attempts to meld electronica and rock, setting a new gold standard and kicking off a tsunami of influence that would be keenly felt over the following decade as countless artists tried to replicate its brilliance. But stepping back a little, and it's not really surprising that Kid A works so damn well. Tom York's nervous vocal style and paranoid lyrics were always destined to work well when paired with twitchy beats and icy cold synths. Those elements entangle themselves perfectly to create a new form of sonic darkness that's as cohesively atmospheric as it is adventurous and consistent. High spots on what is undoubtedly best enjoyed as a single flowing piece includes the opener Everything in Its Right Place with its iconic keyboard riff and swirling cacophony of lyrical discontent, which is aided no end by Tom's desperate vocal performance. The national anthem has a great gurning bass line and a cool rhythmic pulse to it, as well as some jiving horns. How to Disappear Completely is awesome with its weeping feedback wails and sense of creeping misery, while Idiotech kicks ass with its steady beats, glacial synths, and panic lyrics about impending ice ages and inevitable disaster. But the individual moments ultimately drift into the background on this particular release. Kid A really is about the overall package. It's all about the flow, vibes, and atmosphere, which is pretty much flawless. It's dark, icy, sad, paranoid, and stifling, yet at the same time is sonically wide enough to provide the necessary breathing room. It really is a pitch-perfect example of this particular style of music, and it's no wonder that the record became so incredibly influential. An easy 5 stars. Next up we have In Rainbows from 2007, which was the band's 7th LP, and this particular album came with a lot of strangeness surrounding its release. The band had fulfilled their contract with EMI and were labelless for the period surrounding In Rainbows, so they decided to self-finance and self-release the album without any label support or any meaningful kind of promotion. It really came totally out of the blue. Usually new Radiohead records were hyped up by the media for months in advance, but In Rainbows just kind of popped out one day. Moreover, the band put the album out as a pay-what-you-want release, and were the first major act ever to do so. I personally remember paying $0 for the album at the time, mostly because the whole pay-what-you-want thing was completely new to me, although I did pick it up on CD a few years later. The weird hubbub of the release style aside, and what In Rainbows brings to the table is arguably the best set of straight-up rock songs that the band ever recorded. Whereas Hail to the Thief was a bit of a muddled halfway house that sounded perpetually stuck in autopilot, In Rainbows was focused, full of energetic snarl and imbued with a new sense of rhythmic dynamism that in turn brought a danceable thrust to the proceedings. Moreover, the band righted the ship in terms of consistency. All 10 of the tracks on In Rainbows are individually great, as well as feeding into the cohesive and atmospheric whole. My favourites from an LP with zero downtime includes the opening 15 steps, with its cool trip-hop beats, languorous bluesy trills, and steady ramp-up in twitchy tension. Body Snatchers has a kick-ass grinding bass that immediately puts the rock tunes on Hail to the Thief to shame. The blossoming, reverb-laden guitars on the track are pretty great too. Nude is a gorgeous ballad that uses minimalism extremely well, its ghostly synth swells and pick guitar lines sculpting an awesome cathartic soundscape. Weird Fishes / Arpeggi is utterly beautiful, its autumnal guitar lines bulging with sorrow and a sinking feeling of despair. House of Cards has some nice Loge stuttering guitar hooks and a catchy amplified vocal. Jigsaw Falling Into Place is fantastic with its thumping pace, beautiful Latin sounding acoustic guitar trills and frantic badass build-up, while Closer Videotape is a rattling plunge into maudlin pianos and pungent sadness. It's just a perfect way to end the record. So yeah, whilst In Rainbows doesn't have the same kind of genre-defining pull as OK Computer or Kid A, it is Radiohead at their most outright consistent. It's an exciting and emotive album stuffed start to finish with banger after banger, just amazing stuff. 5 stars. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the Radiohead gold medal is going to go to OK Computer from 1997, which was the band's 3rd LP. And what the hell is there left to say about OK Computer, one of the most famous, acclaimed and influential albums ever recorded? Nothing, that's what. But I guess I gotta say something, or we'll just be here twiddling our dicks. In the late 90s, the whole Britpop thing was really starting to stagnate, both artistically and commercially. Most of the Britpop crowd understood this, and there was a concerted trend across the movement to escape the confines of whatever it was that defined the Britpop genre. Unfortunately, as fun as Britpop was, it was about as innovative as a lazy mum serving beans on toast for dinner. Most experimentation resulted in just some electronic blips and bloops or some trip-hop beats being worked into the band's usual sound. With the exception of maybe Blur, true change was proving hard to come by. Then, all of a sudden, Bob's Your Uncle, OK Computer happened. Its icy, futuristic soundscapes and unrivaled use of engineering, effects and production techniques shook the very foundations of rock, finally sending Britpop off to be ignominiously shot round the back of the bike sheds, and instantly creating the likes of Coldplay and reshaping a million other bands in their image. It seemed like every band on the planet had to have their go at making an OK Computer style LP in the decade that followed. And as for the album itself in terms of quality, well, it's a thing of crystalline beauty. It's emotive and epic, it's resigned yet bombastic, it's deathly sad but incredibly catchy, the songs are complex with their use of effects, yet the album feels clean and spacious. It's just a phenomenal record. To nitpick is a futile thing, such is the inconsequential nature of said nitpicks, but I will note that the last two tracks on the LP do take a noticeable step down in quality. Neither are bad, but they're clearly not up to the world-beating standard of everything else. Lucky would be almost rote if it wasn't for the chorus of "Pull me out of the air crash, pull me out of the lake," just giving it that little extra zing. While Closer the Tourist is nicely relaxed but also totally throwaway and kind of forgettable. But that's it, everything else on OK Computer is amazing, earth-shattering even. From the lacerating wiry riffs, scattered bass and cold staccato streaks of guitar that do indeed sound like interstellar bursts that make up the opener Airbag, to the amazing inverted Bohemian Rhapsody for Manic Depressive's epicness of Paranoid Android, to the gorgeous guitars of Subterranean Homesick Alien that sound like they're being played from inside a glacier, the album just gets off to a rip-roaring start. And it goes from strength to strength. Exit music for a film is super impressive with its booming vocals, sense of domestic misery and looming violence. Let Down is one of my favourite songs ever. Those beautiful pick guitar riffs are the stuff of indie dreams, and that split channel vocal climax, chef's kiss, yes please sir, straight into the veins. Karma Police is an insanely catchy yet incredibly dour hit, with its steadily morose pianos and twitchy lyrical tales of petty annoyances bubbling over. Electioneering is a kick-ass bit of stuttering guitar rock with a totally rad drum performance. Climbing Up the Walls is a synth-based heavy slice of glowering electronica, while No Surprises is awesome with its iconic marimbas, harmonic guitar pangs and totally resigned and utterly defeated lyrical brilliance. So yeah, for me, OK Computer takes its place as the best Radiohead album, and is also my personal pick for the most essential album of the 1990s. A very well-deserved and extremely obvious 5 stars. So now I've come to the end of my deep dive, the question remains, did I gain more appreciation for the artist? And the answer is no, not really. I mean, the golden period of Radiohead is amazing, but I always knew that it was. But as I also said in the intro, the band do have a lot of kind of slightly mediocre records that I consider to be vastly overrated and overhyped, and this discography run hasn't really dissuaded me from that notion. Still, that's my opinion and my list. But of course that won't be your list, so why not sound off in the comments section and tell me how you'd rank these records? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Make sure to take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.